Welcome everybody to our NBOA webinar with a very distinguished group of guests who I'll introduce in a moment. For me to be sitting here on April Fool's Day and not be able to partake in any humor or good chime or feel comfortable doing that is truly painful for me. It's one of my favorite holidays. But if a few weeks ago somebody would be telling me that I'd be leading a webinar with subject matters that we will be talking about this hour, one would have thought it's an April Fool's joke. It's truly an incredible time we live in. And I'm delighted to have a group of very talented real estate professionals who are going to help guide us through their take on the issues that we're presently facing. Before doing that, though, I would like to offer a couple comments. And that is that it's April 1st, the first day of the month when rent is due. And obviously there's been a lot of discussion about rent and rent collection. We're aware of the efforts being made by all levels of government to provide assistance to those who are in need. And I have to say that I've seen incredible unity and common purpose among so many people. I was on a phone call this morning sponsored by Preservation Compact with many professionals in the nonprofit world that deal with real estate issues, as well as a couple developers. There's tremendous unity and similar goals that we're all striving for. And it really is a war. We are at war with a silent enemy. And to see the amount of collaboration and communication, we're encouraging all of us to work together. I have to say that every landlord, and I speak to a lot of landlords, every landlord who I speak with are dealing with their tenants in a very empathetic manner, aware of their situation, aware that those who have been laid off due to this crisis are laid off and in a difficult situation through no fault of their own. Every single landlord understands the need to work with those who require assistance and are willing to do their best under the circumstances. One angle that I don't think enough people realize is that in order for landlords to be able to help those who are in need, we need all those who are able to pay to step forward as they are. At least the early indication among the folks I've spoken with are that people get it. And our ability to help is conditioned on the sacrifice and the willingness of all of us, including our existing tenants who have jobs, to step forward and understand that. And also the fact is the number one issue here is a health crisis. It's a housing crisis. It's a crisis in so many levels, but it's a health crisis. And there's stay-at-home orders and there's health consequences to people being able to live in a healthy, safe, secure premises. So we in the housing community are also on the front line, not at the same front line as those who are working heroically at the hospitals and triage centers and the like, but we also have an important role, and our tenants also have an important role to see to it that we're in a position to provide quality, safe housing and give us an opportunity to help and be of service to those who need assistance. So with that said, I welcome an esteemed group of panelists. We have Andy Ahutau, whose name it's taken me years to learn how to pronounce. I don't, do other people struggle with your name, Andy? Your last name?
Yes, and so are you still today, but that's okay.
Okay, help me.
Some of my friends still, you say my name in many different ways, and I enjoy it every time. So it's all good. The pronunciation is Andy Ato.
Ato.
Yep. Right. The Hebrew name Achitov was supposedly Americanized when my great grandfather came to the United States from Turkey. So,
okay. Well, we hope to learn more about it, and I'm going to try to get it right from here on out. an easier name to pronounce, Doug Imber with Essex Realty. And Doug's a long-term friend of mine and of the Builders Group, and one of the most esteemed and intelligent folks that I know in the industry. And I'm so happy to have you aboard.
Thanks, Michael.
Another name that I don't think I struggle with, and he's our elder, Mike Choros with Choros. I believe it's Choros Realty. Is the name you go by now, Mike? Is that right?
Choros Properties, but call me by any name. Just bring me the deal.
Okay, that sounds fine. Of course, and a newer friend of mine I met at the summer soiree a couple years ago. I've been so pleased to get to know Thomas Kearney especially in the last 6 to 8 months as we started to work together in dealing with other legislative issues. And Thomas, with early, brings a tremendous perspective, and welcome, Thomas, to this webinar.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me on today.
Okay, so I'm going to ask each of you when you do talk for the first time, offering a substantive response, that you offer us a little more background and history about who you are and what you do, and realize that if you guys don't talk well about yourselves, nobody else might. So show us in a great light. Also, at the bottom of the screen, for those of you who might be newer to this format, there is a chat button. And if you click that button, you can see that a lot of people's names and the ability to ask questions, make comments. I think that last time somebody offered me a comment to button this, to keep the top button. So those are important type of comments that we'll monitor, but also substantive questions that any of you might have. We'll try to keep an eye on them and be sure that we're keeping a pulse on how people are feeling and acting. And anything else that you might want to say, maybe you want to offer a suggestion of what we might want to cover in a future webcast. We'd really be glad to see and hear anything productive and constructive that you want to throw our way. We are, many of us who own smaller apartment buildings we own small businesses. And we all have varying degrees of financial flexibility when we deal with these situations, but we're all inspired and motivated to do the right thing. Yet we can learn a lot from looking in the back door and looking at what's happened. No other situation in our lifetimes has ever, I don't think, rivaled what we have today. But to offer some background on the subject of what we can learn from the past, I'm going to turn it to Mike Choros and ask you to speak about that.
Well, briefly, I'll introduce myself to those that don't know me. I've been a licensed real estate broker since 1971, building maintenance for 5 years prior to that, so about 55 years of experience in operating buildings. My partners and I owned and operated mostly on the north side of Chicago, Lakeview, Rogers Park, Edgewater, and about 3,000 units and a few million square feet of commercial in the surrounding metropolitan area. The reason I was asked to speak was because of what I've called the real estate roller coaster, which follows the roller coaster of the economy. And a lot of us, on this chat, didn't live through the 73 to 75 recession, the 1980 recession, the 81, 82 recession, when interest rates were 20% and values were collapsing across the market. We had the tax law change in October of '86, which led to a crash in commercial real estate that people don't remember or realize, that started in October of '87, and as Sam Zell coined the term, stay alive till 95. And again, I don't have to talk about the dot-com bust of 2001 or the 2008 that went. But the point that I'm going to try to make in this next couple of minutes is that this may have come quick, but it's not going to go away quickly. So we've got to look at not just, are we going to collect April rent, but how about May rent? How about July? Even when we're past the virus, the after effects of this economic bust of 20 to 30% on employment by the time this is done is going to linger. It's going to linger not only with your tenants, it's going to linger with your lenders, and we have to be proactive on both. I'm not going to sit here and say that all the experience of the past is directly relevant to today's crisis, but the one thing that is happening today is that the situation's evolving almost every hour. We've been getting the releases from tenants groups. We've been getting releases from various aldermen. For the most part, the ones that are in favor of tenant rent freezes or strikes. But there's other aldermen that we've been talking to that I can't talk about directly quote right now, that are rational, that are logical, that understand that the building owners have not only real estate taxes, mortgages, and utilities that have to be paid, and in most situations, that's less than 10% of the rent. One thing that I learned through the years was that when the economy is in trouble, when you've got a building that went from 100% occupancy to 60% occupancy, and that happened to be a real number of a 60-unit building, a 6040 North Sheridan we had, because everybody was buying condos at the time. You've got to work with the existing tenants closer than ever. You have to understand their situation, but you have to offer them positive information. Right now, if you look at the programs that are becoming available, city, state, but most of all federal, if pushed in the right direction or given the information, and they can pay their rent. And again, that's a situation that's evolving, and there's other people that are going to speak to that much more clearly than I have. But again, Mike started the discussion talking about the war. It is a war, and there's tactical aspects and there's strategic. Tactical being the near term, which is how do we get our April rent? How do we get our May rent? And then the strategic is, what are we going to do in fall? I'm not doom and gloom by any means, but I believe in being realistic, and on my experience, that's the reality. These things don't go away quickly, and it's not as soon as the virus, we have a vaccine and a treatment, and that's done. It's going to be 6 months. It's going to be a year, and there are going to be ripples throughout the entire industry. And that's, I think, all I'm going to offer right now.
You didn't once mention Byzantine history, Mike.
I can go into that, the plague of Justinian in 541, but no one cares. This is something that, I try to have humor in everything I do in life, and people that have worked with me know in the darkest moments, I'll come up with a quip, or I'll be flippant. This is a little too serious for all of us here in the room. And I have a hard time. I have a hard time doing it. So I will get to that if anyone ever wants to buy me a glass of wine sometime.
Okay. All right. Andy, we're bringing you into this conversation because you have wear several hats. You've been involved in leasing end of the game. You've as a property owner, an investor in properties, but also as a developer. So why don't you offer us the lay of the land as you're seeing it today?
Yeah, sure. For those of you that don't know me, I think a lot of you do. I have started my career in the leasing business, working for the apartment people during the dot-com crash. That was what got me into real estate. I was laid off of a technology company and decided to learn the leasing business. Thought that would be the best place to learn the real estate market, and I think it turned out to be hugely beneficial for me. Started my own company about a year later, Chicago Apartment Finders, which turned into one of the largest, if not the largest, apartment leasing company in Chicago, which we eventually sold to Coldwell Banker in 2015, which is now what I focus on, now allowing me to focus on my development business. So 2009 crash, we were able to leverage that business and started to acquire our own portfolio, and learned a lot about construction and development. Eventually took on some larger projects similar to what we're doing today. And I think those are some of the things that you probably want to hear about is what are we working on today, and how what are we seeing out there in the leasing front. We have City Pads is the name of my current company, and we've developed 15 projects over the last 5 years, and they've gotten larger in scale as we've grown. The largest projects we have are just being completed this month. So we have a 59 unit co-living building in Pilsen being operated by Common, a 105 unit project in Edgewater that will be managed by the Kagan family. They are our capital partner in that project. And we have a 76 unit studio building that's actually under construction on Wilson Avenue. I'll start with the co-living building in Pilsen. We probably be surprised to hear we opened the leasing 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of the crisis, and they have toured. Now, a lot of this is virtual. Don't get me wrong. People are not really walking through the building, but a lot of we've actually had 45 virtual tours that have occurred, and another 55 scheduled. So in the last 2 weeks, they have 100 interested individuals interested in moving into the property. That's really positive and something to probably feel a little bit better about. Although only 3 of those have actually applied to live there. So what there's a lot of traffic. There's still interest in the units. Co-living is not something that's going to disappear. I think there's affordability aspect there that's really important to people. Common also does a really good job cleaning the spaces, which is appealing to the renter. And they bring an opportunity, for people that we believe to be, lowercase affordable housing.
Can you just in 2 sentences remind us what co-housing means?
So co-living there are many different interpretations of that. The way we've designed our co-living projects is we're building 3 and 4 bedroom units. Those units are fully furnished. They come fully stocked with everything you need to live there, including pots and pans, all of your dry goods they supply for you, laundry detergent, dishwasher fluid, paper towels, toilet paper in the shared bathrooms. The apartment is cleaned weekly, and then we amenitize the building so you have other places to hang out. But you do have a traditional living room, you have a traditional kitchen in your apartment, and you share that with the 3 other people that live there. Okay. And you pay a flat rent. So one of the ideas of co-living is that you take away the pains of sharing. So the utilities are already taken care of. You're paying one flat rent. The average rent in our building in Pilsen, including all utilities, is $1,250 a month. So if you take out all of the cost of furniture and utilities, it's really a $1,000 apartment, is what we like to say. So we're optimistic that there's traffic. I'm disappointed we have not seen a lot of conversions. That doesn't surprise me. I mean, I'm sure people are interested in looking, but are not comfortable making commitments. So today we just authorized them to offer a 2-month incentive. So we're now going to offer people to live for free for the first 2 months of the lease. We're also going to waive 6 months of parking. That we think will help convert some people that are not sure what's going to happen over the next month or 2, give some people room to breathe, and an opportunity to maybe make a decision, even during the crisis. Okay. So we'll see how that works. It's something we just authorized today, and then we're happy to report back in a couple weeks if that's effective.
And each tenant has a separate lease, correct?
No, each tenant does not. It's a 4-bedroom apartment with 1 lease. So that you're signing a joint and several lease. You also sign a membership agreement that really limits your liability to your bedroom. Okay.
So keep going with the other stuff.
Yeah, so the other building that we are just finishing is a 105 units in Edgewater. It's a 6-story building. Over half the units are studios, and then the balance of the building, we have one bedrooms and 2-bedroom units. We are also seeing a reasonable amount of traffic there. We hired Spaces Real Estate to be the exclusive broker. We've seen 20 to 30 leads a week, actual showings. I think we saw 30 last week and 30 the first week and 20 the second week. And we have, so far we have two, as of 2 days ago, we have 2 signed leases and 1 pending application. So again, reasonable traffic, very little commitment. And we're just, it seems
So that seems to be your trend. You're getting traffic, but not conversions, correct?
that's correct. And the first 2 leases there are students from Loyola. So, I don't know what that means, but that's just the 2 first people we
What's
had to
your
commit.
take on the present day crisis generally then, and how we're looking in the near future?
I'm shocked at how quick things are changing. That's my feeling on it. I cannot believe how quickly things are occurring and people are reacting to the crisis. We haven't even been through the first month of collections, and we're already forming opinions on what's going to happen. So I tend to be a little bit maybe too optimistic on things, but we have only in our portfolio, we only have 6 tenants that have expressed concern about paying rent in April. I do fully expect that to grow. I'm also very fortunate that almost every one of our loans is with Freddie Mac, and we will be utilizing their forbearance program if need be. So I don't have a whole lot more to say on that. I mean, I do expect to have more tenants asking for help, and I've directed all of our property managers to do whatever we can to work with people. Do not charge them late fees. Do not raise their rents this year. Let's do everything we can to work with people. But if somebody's not responding, and they're taking the shortcut to dealing with this, we have to be, we can't just be forgiving and let somebody take advantage of the situation. So really hoping that we get as many people as possible to pay rent that are able to, and those that are in trouble, we're going to do what we can to work with people and hopefully keep them as a tenant for next year. On the new development front, I'm still optimistic that we'll eventually come out of this and the economy will catch steam just where it was. There was so much momentum going into this that you got to think that yes, there will be problems that linger, but I'm again maybe too optimistic that things will turn around in several months here, and we'll be back to a semblance of normal. We have 3 properties that we're just signing contracts on. I am asking for a 90-day due diligence period on my contracts, allowing me some time to work through the issues. We do not believe that lenders will provide a construction financing tomorrow. Very hopeful they will in 2 months or 3 months. But I will tell you, a lot of them are going to want to know how the lease up is going at our projects that we have today. And if I cannot give them positive response, it'll be difficult for us to get construction financing. So I'm hopeful 90 days is enough time.
Great. Just to give folks a timeline here, we're going to have this panel discussion for another 20 minutes. Under no circumstances, unless we're on the verge of finding a cure for the COVID crisis, we're going to be done by 3 o'clock. So let's find a cure and extend it 10 minutes. How's that? Doug, let's hear from your perspective as somebody who's offered so many of us so much guidance when it comes to investment real estate.
Well, thanks, Mike. That's nice of you to say, and thanks for having me on the panel. Frankly, I'm just happy to have a reason to put on something other than sweatpants and sweatshirts. It's seeing everybody's face. It's great to see so many friends. We've all missed one another. I started my career in 1987 after undergrad, not really understanding what Tax Reform Act 86 meant. I started my company, Essex, in 1990, and with great partners and great teammates, we've stayed active selling Chicago area apartment properties for 30 years. And along the way, I also started buying apartment buildings, some in Chicago, but mostly in other markets. And we started by doing small one-off syndications and then larger deals, and eventually moved to different fund strategies. And I'd like to think that brokerage has helped us as buyers and vice versa. I also appreciate, Mike, being given the crystal ball question. And I'm reminded of the old saying that those who know don't say. and those who say don't know. So my short answer to everyone is, I don't know, but I certainly have some thoughts about it. And I guess to begin with, I'd say that I'm a pretty glass half full type of person. And what many of today's comments, including mine, are pretty sobering. I want to start by saying this too will pass, and we just have to keep as positive an outlook as possible. The congressional bailout seems really comprehensive, and I think should soften some of the impact, but obviously not all of it. And more is likely needed, especially at the state and municipal level. Certainly this is an important week for all of us as we track rent collections. But as Mike Choro said, April collections are probably going to look different than May's, which are going to look different than June's. Moreover, the news is changing daily and weekly. In addition, this is in addition to the time we're sheltering in place. I think we also need time for the economy to recover and workers to find new employment. I think the impact on our industry will be felt depending on several variables. Clearly, this all depends on the length of the crisis. The quicker this is over, the quicker the recovery, and I think the more V-like the recovery will look. But I also suspect that the impact will be felt depending on the socioeconomic strength of a property's neighborhood and by the financial strength of a property's ownership. For example, overall, household savings of residents in Lincoln Park are different than those in the South Side, and the impacts will be felt differently. Similarly, some owners are more levered or have less in operating reserves than other owners, and these variables will affect what follows. I also think that the impact may depend on the size of the property. And what I mean by that is I think the smaller investors are often the first ones hit and the last ones to recover. And as a result, I fear that the buying pool for smaller properties may contract. From a transaction perspective, Essex has been fortunate that we've had a number of deals close in the past 2 weeks and a few more hopefully closing soon. Although the ones that we had a week and a half ago, candidly, we didn't know if the water department would be open or the title company would be open or the recorder of deeds would be around. But frankly, we haven't been taking any new properties to the market. So we expect that sales activities are going to grind to a halt pretty soon. And, lastly, and I genuinely hope that I'm wrong about this, but I think there will be some buying opportunities once the crisis ends. Not only do I think there will be some distressed situations like we saw in the last recession, but even apartment investors who can avoid big problems may still want to shore up their cash position and sell a property or two. So I would suggest that, while everybody's priority is weathering the storm, I would be thinking about also how do you assemble capital to have available for after this, because there may be some opportunities like we saw in the last downturn. So that's kind of my high level view, and I'll kind of defer my other comments to any questions.
How do you see the impact on A-level properties versus B and what we call C properties?
Right. And that kind of gets to my comment about household savings. In our portfolio, we have properties where we have a property in Portland, Oregon, that although it's new construction, a good location, is primarily studios. And it's the quintessential sort of hipster property in Portland, with bike messengers and bartenders and baristas living there. And we've gotten probably 5 to 8% of the tenants telling us they're going to struggle with April rents. On the other hand, we have some A property of a 60-unit property I'm a general partner of in Chicago's Old Town. And we haven't had a single tenant tell us that they're going to struggle. Now, we have management, updating collections on, once or twice a week to send that around. But I think that not in all cases, but in many cases, the A properties, that resident base historically has had a little bit more staying power and savings, and frankly, the layoffs haven't been as pervasive yet in that group. It's not to say it hasn't affected some, but as a whole, that's not been the case. Versus if you have a C property and many of your residents are working in the restaurant industry or manufacturing, those jobs have been laid off already. I think the impact there will be felt more in April collections than say at an A property.
I mean, I've heard that in a prior crisis, it might have been the 2008. Those with college educations came out of it with at the end of the crisis, the unemployment rate was in the perhaps in the 6% range, 5 or 6% range, whereas those with high school diplomas or less saw unemployment in the low to mid-teens. And I suspect that we might be looking at a similar type of situation here. Thomas, do you want to introduce yourself and offer your perspective?
Thomas Kearney here. I'm the founder and CEO of Early. It's an investment platform that connects real estate investors with multifamily property deal sponsors. We believe that going forward, technology will become a more critical piece in being able to secure equity capital for your deals as an apartment syndicator. I mean, my thoughts on this is relative to my background, which is in the public market space around equities, asset management, and investment banking, is that as a real estate building owner, you have to pay attention to what's going on in corporate America. You know, what are they doing strategically in terms of their efforts to continue to employ their employees as well as pay their employees, because, you know, that's where the issues are going to start. And I mean, ultimately, it's, you know, you look at 2008, because I actually started in the industry at that point in time, and, you know, how the economy recovered. And essentially at this point, you know, it's a lot different, because I look at it as there's coming out of this, there will be a lot of companies who ultimately decide to keep it the way it is. But then and on the other side of that, they will actually try and grow. You see a lot of hiring and economic opportunities with Amazon and other retailers who are seeing stronger sales during this period of time. So, I mean, it's a very interesting, you know, thing. I look at the glass as half full, but you just never know. You know, relative to the city, every demographic in every area has a different perspective on this. You know, I was born on the north side and raised between the north and the south side, and I think that there are different concerns for each building owner, for each type of tenant, and then each type of professional, whether they're white collar or blue collar. And I think one of the biggest things you can see out of this is there might be a stronger demand for larger units, just because people are going to start to work from home more. And the person who's living in a smaller apartment may say, hey, I want a bigger place because I'm not going to go back into the office once the dust settles on this, because, you know, companies, once they adopt a way of doing things, if it's more economically efficient, they'll stick to it post the crisis.
Okay. I'd like to encourage folks on the chat room to submit any questions that you might have. This is a platform that really allows us to hear from the audience and get perspective from them. What about access to capital then? How do you see the capital markets? And I mean, we're guessing. We've never been anywhere near this before.
When you look at the public markets, you know, you see that the market's down, you know, 30%, 25%, whatever. And I mean, that's what happens. People get scared. They begin to cash in their 401ks. They begin to sell their positions, and, you know, cash can be king in these types of scenarios. As far as allocation of capital, there's been a lot of dry powder that's been raised by the private capital community, you know, PE funds, private equity funds, you know, hedge funds, real estate, private equity investors. And this is, you know, a situation for them where, you know, when there's blood in the streets, buy. So there will be a lot of well-positioned capital providers in the market who are looking for distressed and unique opportunities, either in the real estate realm or even in acquiring companies. So, I mean, it's tough to say, but ultimately, if you have a solid deal going into a capital raising situation and you understand the position of the investor base that you're reaching out to, you should be successful in being able to secure that capital for a deal.
You know, I'd add to that, Michael, that you know, just over the last few weeks, we've seen debt spreads widen dramatically, and lenders starting, even on existing deals they have in their portfolio and giving commitments for, requiring interest reserves for some extended period of time. I've heard a year and a half, Last week I had a call with a lender that we all know and very well regarded in our industry. And I said, if I brought you a deal tomorrow that was 55% loan to value in a good location, what would you quote? He said, I'd quote you a rate that would ensure that I didn't get awarded the deal. So I think on the debt side, it's still fluid, and I'm confident that over time things will even out, and you'll see more normalized pricing. But right now, I think everybody's sort of addressing the refinances they have in process and the acquisitions they have in process.
Okay, so the subject matter of this discussion is the real estate roller coaster ride. And before we get on any roller coaster, we're cautioned to fasten our seatbelts or take your hat off or put your sunglasses in your pocket or whatever. Those are best practices. I'd like to ask each of you to come up with a best practice or two that we all ought to be considering as we're engaged in this tumultuous plunge in this market. Doug, I know that you mentioned something important to me last Friday about non-recourse.
Oh, well, thanks. I think the short answer, Mike, to your question is that my primary recommendation is communication with residents, staff, investors, lenders, all of that. But one thing that we've been sort of triaging is making sure that we don't do anything that could adversely affect our non-recourse loan status. All of our debt is non-recourse, but there are certain triggers. So, for example, we have one restaurant space that asked for an abatement, and we want to help them get to the other side. And we said we would work with them. However, we also let them know that we can't give any abatement without first getting lender consent. Similarly, and I don't think hopefully anybody's at this point yet, but there could come a point where somebody calls their lender and says, the deal's upside down or they don't have any money after this month. Well, we've been advised that those are actually acknowledgments of insolvency and can trigger recourse. So I think as you are communicating, and particularly with your lender, that you do so with good legal advice and understanding what your documents say so that you don't do something that can have an adverse effect.
Okay.
To piggyback in on that and like giving historical, in the late 80s, our typical loan was with a life company that was a 5-year renewable. And all of a sudden in the late 80s, when the regulators were telling the life companies you have to adjust your portfolio downwards, all of a sudden you were at the end of the 5 years and you went to renew and you were told, no, sorry, we can't renew. And it was just open and shut. So again, when the lenders start closing the door because of their concerns, again, just be ready for it. One thing I'd like to add to my previous discussion is one thing is different today than we've had in previous recessions and collapses of the market, is we've got some terrific resources today for residents. And what we need to do is communicate to understand them ourselves, organize those where that they're understandable and palatable to our residents. Because if you look at between unemployment, a couple of the federal programs that are out there, some of our people that are some of our residents that are in the service industry might be getting up to $4,000 a month. So a lot of people on that lower end in the C properties are going to be able to afford to pay rent if you can show them how to utilize the resources out there.
Okay. Yep, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add my thoughts. I feel actually very lucky in the position that we're in on our 2 development projects. And for a while, I was thinking we made a mistake. I mean, we signed up a HUD 221D4 construction loan for our project in Edgewater, and our rate is 4.3%. And while rates have been tanking, I'm kicking myself in January of this year saying, darn, why did I do that? Now, 3 months later, I'm saying, wow, am I lucky that I've got that loan in place, because it's a 40-year loan, non-recourse. So if the lease up takes longer than we expect, we already have our permanent financing in place. And then in our project near Pilsen, the co-living project, fortunately had a partner that was pushing really hard with our lender to give us as many extension options and also permanent conversion options as possible. So we started off with I think it was a 3-year loan, 2 years of construction, 1 year option to extend. They asked for a debt service cover ratio to trigger. We ended up getting a 2 years on the construction and 2 1-year extension options with no debt coverage ratio trigger, and also another 2-year permanent option that does have a 1.0 debt coverage ratio. So, the advice would be just to, let banks know that you just never know what the world's going to bring you. You're going to do everything in your power to finish construction and do what you're supposed to do, but the world can deliver you something that you just don't expect, a curveball, and you need time. You might need time. You just don't know. So very fortunate that both those projects, as much as we're in the situation, we're not up against the wall to put people in the buildings and force the situation. So that's my advice there.
Any of you have more perspective on pursuing forbearance, and what are the what are the processes and the pitfalls or best practices that Doug, you alluded to something earlier, but how do people go about confronting that remedy, and what are the benefits and drawbacks to pursuing that?
I don't know that I have the details yet, honestly. Personally, we're still looking, we're still figuring it out. We have we work a lot with a couple different lenders. We have some loans. CBRE is the DUS lender on, and also with Greystone. Both have told me that there's still more information coming as to how those programs are going to work. In fact, UBA, Edgewater Uptown Builders Association, has our meeting coming up in a couple weeks, where we have Clint Darby that's going to speak, and he asked that we push that out a couple weeks, that more details will be out in the next week or so on how that program will work. And certainly we want to make sure, as Doug alluded to, that we are not triggering any recourse on our loans by using that forbearance as an option. And that's really important that we're careful there. So I don't know if, Doug, you have any more information on what you're seeing or what those programs will look like, but I don't know. We don't know yet. We just know that they're going to be offering 90 days of forbearance on the Freddie loans. I don't know how that'll work though.
I'd like to touch on this very sensitive and challenging issue that I opened this program with, and that is this notion that seems to be a global phenomenon of a rent strike. I'd like to direct the question first to Thomas. How do you see this concern playing out, and how do you view the proper industry response?
I mean, from what I've read, I mean, it seems like there are two types of people that are pursuing this. There are people who tend to want more from their landlords who can afford to pay. Prime example, some properties on the north side, and then there's some people on the south side who feel, relative to all of these subsidies that are potentially available to building owners, there's an opportunity for them to strike, because ultimately, there's forbearance, or there's going to be, lending programs set up by the federal government at the state level to provide some capital relative to those gaps in expenses from what they're receiving in actual revenue from rent. You don't know how this is going to play, because, turn around and people can go back to work and be able to catch up. The bigger issue is, some of the households who are unable to pay rent, even though they are getting some sort of stimulus check from the government, they're probably already operating at a deficit, and they may prioritize their rent behind other expenses that they need in order to live, like food and other essentials on a day-to-day.
Right. Any comment? I mean, it's a challenging discussion, except for what I would say is something everybody knows. Before we even look at, there's no equality between our rental income, which represents nearly 100% of our inflow, and any forbearance or mortgage relief, which is an obligation we will have to pay later, which would represent only a smaller portion of our overall obligations and expenses, which include property tax and maintenance and all those utilities and all those other expenses. so the notion that all we have to do is get mortgage foreclosure relief and we can absorb or handle any kind of initiative like that. Yet I do, and so it is something that can cause us to be concerned. But so far, I think folks are largely understanding the importance of keeping their housing intact and safe. Does anybody else want to add anything to that?
Mike, I knowing so many of the people in this audience and so many other folks throughout the apartment ownership community, I think everyone I've spoken with has a really strong sense of compassion about helping those really in need through this. It's in everybody's best interest. I also think that there's a real moral hazard it creates by having a rent strike, that suddenly people feel like they don't have to pay rent, and it just leads and furthers the problem. I think there's with the eviction freeze doesn't mean you can't file an eviction. So I think if somebody's trying to abuse the system, they need to understand that there's a consequence that can, having an eviction filed can adversely affect their credit and their ability to find housing in the future. And I also need to understand that the folks who are being affected aren't just the property owner, but the building engineer, the person who works in an office processing the checks, and the person who's paying the bills oftentimes, that by refusing to pay rent, you're actually injuring them just as much. So I think that everyone I've spoken with has the right perspective, that you have to be compassionate through this time, but also maintain a reasonable sense of overall justice for everybody involved.
Well, I think that one in the chat, Nick Katsafotis really summarizes it well, that we need to differ between hardships and opportunistic, and highlighting that is really the key in how you're going to deal with people. It has to be on an individual basis. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of aggravation. But the reality is you've got to separate the two.
I invite those of you in the chat room who are landlords to just indicate yes or no. How many discussions have you had with tenants so far? I think we all have had this challenging and honest discourse and trying to assess people's needs and respond accordingly. I know I've had to do it on several occasions. To the extent that we do enter into a restructuring of a rental payment plan, do you have any best practices or suggestions, any of you?
To me, it seems like a case. It has to be case by case, just letting. You've got to just get into a conversation and try to have, an understanding of what each person's going through. I don't know if there can be a format for all individuals.
Yeah, I know that go ahead. Yeah.
No, but before I see the time is getting late, and before we close, it doesn't have to be now, but I'd like Mike Lasser to kind of bring everybody up to date what we're doing on the political end, that which we can talk about in an open forum with probably very low security. But it doesn't have to be now, Mike, but don't, again, the clock is ticking.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all for participating in this discussion, and thanks to all of you who are listening or at least have as background sound. There's a wide range of wonderful music and other sources of background music or chatter, and the fact that you'd even consider us is an honor. We are looking forward to a similar call as this on Friday, where we'll likely have two aldermen joining us. One is confirmed, the other we're working on confirming those details. That will be at 3 o'clock, most likely on Friday. Also, we're also finalizing arrangements with Assessor Kagi, with whom we had a discussion on Monday to plan a call, and we really look forward to hearing from him, as well as his Chief Valuation Officer, Donald Myers. And when we meet with them, I think it will be akin to our discussion with Mike Choros. We're going to hear that they too have had considerable experience in crisis management, fascinating stuff that they've dealt with in their lives. And before we get into the substantive issues of the assessment process, which, you know, it's truly, if we thought it was challenging and controversial a month ago or 6 months ago, it's wildly challenging and it will be controversial. And I think it'll be a great discussion and informative, and we look forward to having that. On the political front, you know, I've said this ever since I took over the reins of the NBOA, and my colleagues on our board have realized that perhaps more so than ever before, it seems like one of the responsibilities of being a landlord these days or a housing provider is, you know, we have to have some knowledge of banking and of finance, of property management, of so many things, but one of our roles now is to be an advocate. And we have some tremendous organizations that represent landlord interests, the CAA, the realtors. On a related front, the home builders all have tremendous leadership and paid lobbyists. The NBOA, we're in the neighborhoods. We don't use a lobbyist. Our belief is that we need to individually, as landlords or in real estate professions that support us, need to really develop relationships at all levels of government. And I've had the great pleasure of getting to know a lot of people in the last couple of years. I value so many relationships with people who have similar and opposing views. If you can develop relationships and have an opportunity, attend a fundraiser. You don't have to contribute at the highest level, but attend and take a chance to talk and meet folks and build relationships, and be honest, be sincere, and share information and your perspective, because folks that I've met in the governmental arena, whether it's at city, county, or state levels, genuinely do care. Maybe not all of them, and maybe many of them are politicians first, but I do think there's, especially in a time like this, we're all in over our heads. We all need to rely on the wisdom, the collective wisdom from everybody. And so what I'm saying, Mike, if I'm answering your question, is to build your relationships, talk to your elected officials. The NBOA might be offering guidance in terms of what needs to be said. I think on this most recent issue of the rent strike, I think it would behoove the city and the county and the state that's going to be relying on the property tax revenue that we pay as landlords to our money that we contribute when our property tax bill supports county, state, and city government. It supports Cook County Hospital. It supports the teachers. It supports the pensions. It supports everything. And I'm looking for more and more elected officials to say, we are united, and we need to encourage landlords to work with their tenants, to be compassionate and empathetic. The tenants need to be empathetic about our role and responsibility in terms of what we do. And let's tackle the problem in a responsible, unified fashion.
Well, what we all need to do is these relationships that we've built through the years with various aldermen, state reps, state senators, and all the way up and down the line, is to educate them to what the reality of real estate ownership is. We've had 4 of the recent Democratic Socialists that were elected to city council have talked about a rent freeze. Luckily, that particular approach isn't going anywhere. Other aldermen have put a lot of pressure on the landlords, and again, not really understanding the economics, that the real estate taxes are what fund all activities in the city of Chicago. So we're reaching out to people. We've got a few, we've got maybe a nucleus that is coming together that understand basic business. But I encourage all of you, whoever you know, wherever you know, to try to be, positive representatives of our industry.
Thomas, go ahead. We don't hear you.
You're
Are
muted.
you-
Yeah,
There you go.
so I'd also like to add with the, with everyone looking at the stimulus as a bailout, when you look at, if you go deeper into those numbers, you will see that a lot of that money is for the individual households of America and for
Right.
your industries. So you need to communicate to your political, your politicians, your political base, and to the people that you have relationships with. This is my business. This is where it's at, and this is how this impacts me. Everyone isn't going to get some sort of relief from some sort of government entity relative to them being a building owner and what their financial situation is with their properties and with their tenants. Like I said, everyone's paying attention to that one aggregate number of $2 trillion, but where is that money really going? And is that money going into into the pockets of building owners, or is it going into their tenants?
Right. Okay, we're down to the wire here. I'd like to invite Doug or Andy. Do you have any parting comments?
I just good luck with the challenges that we're going through, and I hope everybody stays healthy and has success working through the challenges that everybody's going through, because we're all in this together.
Doug?
Mike, I think that over the past 3 weeks, having this level of communication and idea sharing has been invaluable. So first of all, thanks. I know how much you've been working on this stuff, not just during this crisis, but before. So first and foremost, I appreciate all your efforts. I realize that this is a very scary time for everybody. No one's immune to it. But I also am going back to my original comment of being a glass half full person, that I think oftentimes in my life I found that the fear of something is worse than the reality of it. And I think we're all hopeful that over the coming weeks that this passes quickly, and that there'll be some process, hopefully before long, of removing the social distancing and gradually getting back to work, and hopefully that happens quickly. And wish everybody good health and to stay safe.
Okay, thank you for those great words. We will be sending out some links for any landlords that want to provide guidance to tenants in terms of resources that might be available at a variety of different levels. We'll try to provide those links. I think we're all inundated with emails, we're inundated with lists of links, and there's just so much out there. There's not enough hours in the day to catch up with all the information coming our way. But if you need it, we're going to provide that to you. Thank you all for joining us on a wonderful phone call. I look forward to talking to you again and being in a position where we can maybe have reason to laugh and have a deferment on our April Fool humor. Okay? Thank you all. Appreciate it.
But the seatbelt light is still on.
Okay, it is. All right. Thank you all. Thomas, thank you, Andy, and
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Adios.